John, an article in the British press recently said that now was a good time to reintroduce school boards as a way of having a proper democratic control of education. Do you think you could give us a brief history of the school board?
Well, I'll try. The challenge is to do that in about 4 minutes flat. The school boards came into existence in the 1870s as a way of trying to get the local population to take a far greater sense of ownership of schools. Now, a little bit of background that is needed, because we use the word school in England thinking there's a great historical story behind this. And in one sense there is. There have been schools in England since the 7th century. During the Middle Ages, there were a number of grammar schools built. Shakespeare went to a grammar school. But then, fascinatingly, the Industrial Revolution, which changed the face of England completely, was based not on what children learnt in school. It was based very much on apprenticeship and craftsmanship schools. And those craftsmen had to learn to make sense of what they had in their minds, into their hands, into their bodies. They did things. They learnt on the job. And as such, by the early 1700s, well, certainly the mid-1700s, Britain was leading the world in the Industrial Revolution. As we did that, so we actually destroyed the apprenticeship system that enabled children to learn on the job. And so we came into the 19th century and there was an absolute crisis. Children were running wild because there was nowhere for them to go. In fact, they were called hooligans. The first time anybody ever used the word hooligan was in about 1810 to describe children whose parents were working 12, 14 hours a day in the mills, and there was no to bring the children up. Government pursued a laissez-faire policy and said this isn't our concern, it's up to the children, up to the parents to sort that out. The parents didn't. And from 1800 to 1870, the churches, through the collection plates, funded the establishment of 15,000 schools across England. And you can see them every town and village you go into, St. Peter's this, St. Paul's that, whatever. By 1870, those schools were only educating half the children of the country, and they couldn't find more private, more collection plates. And so government turned around and said, we still don't want to take control ourselves, but if there's anywhere, if there are any groups of people who are prepared to set up what we'll call a school board and take full responsibility for the education of all the children in their area, government will empower them to levy a local tax. And that local tax can be used to fund whatever is necessary in the minds of the school board directors. This was an amazing success. Almost instantaneously, floods of people came forward and said, we would like to take responsibility for, let me give you an illustration, sitting in the city of Bath, there would have been 2 school boards whose sole job would have been to have looked after and developed the opportunity for all the children living in Bath. Quite small really, 30,000, 40,000 people. They did so well that within 30 years, the number of children in school had grown enormously, and, very interestingly, they were offering such very interesting courses, not just to 14 or 15, but they were offering interesting courses which actually challenged the old grammar schools, who are having rather traditional education, and they challenged the new public schools. By 1902, government was actually envious of the success of these local school boards. And they were antagonised by the fact that the directors of the individual school boards were achieving more than government achieved. And this is a very awful story, because they were so successful that they were abolished. They were abolished, and in their place, central government said, we will plan the provision of education for everybody elsewhere. And in a stroke, that destroyed all the local enthusiasm that had got behind the school boards and had given children opportunities. Some of those school boards were taking children through to the age of 17. Government said, this is a waste of our money. And in 1902, they legislated to say that there'd be no money for any form of state education for children beyond the age of 14. And that devastated the school board system, which was a local system of locally elected people. You met them when you walked down the street. If your school wasn't performing well, you knew who to go and talk to about it. You didn't go to some distant person 20 miles away. It was a local responsibility, and that just disappeared. The real horror of it was that by the time Britain entered the Second World War in 1939, we had the lowest proportion of children in school of any country in Europe. Only 18% of 14-year-olds were still in school in 1939. That's not very long ago. Now, the struggle continues. Is education to be run locally, nationally, or is the unit of change simply the school? The school board said no, the unit of change is the totality of the schools working together, not just the single school. So when people say, yes, bring back the school boards because that reintroduces the idea of local democracy, that is absolutely spot on. Because it did mean that the only people, or the people who had to make the decisions as to how the schools were going to work, were the local people, and if things went wrong, they couldn't appeal to somebody else to sort it out, they had to sort it out for themselves.